Imagine you have a vast knowledge of cinema history from watching tons of movies. You could be like Quentin Tarantino with an illustrious career as a screenwriter and director, or you could be like Eric Binford, who goes on a killing spree all while dressed up as famous movie characters. Eric's story is told in the 1980 movie Fade to Black. We'll take a look back at this psychological horror film on the next Back to the Feature.
Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
We first meet Eric at home where he lives with his overbearing wheelchair-bound Aunt Stella. She rides him quite a bit because he's a bit of a slacker who spends his time watching old movies and chain smoking. He fancies himself to be the James Cagney tough guy from the movie White Heat, but his reality is quite the opposite. As overbearing as Aunt Stella might be, she's actually just trying to get Eric to take better care of himself and to improve his station in life by not burying his head in old movies. Eric heads off to work at a film distribution company where he gets reprimanded by his boss for being late again and just generally screwing up all the time. We then jump over to the local police station where a criminal psychologist named Dr. Moriaty is starting a partnership with the local PD. The police captain assigns a female officer named Anne to help him get set up, and lucky for him, she's read his file and she's a bit of a fan of his work. As Eric is heading out on a work errand, he makes a bet with his coworker Richie on a Casablanca trivia question. And yes, that's a young Mickey Rourke. He later stops at a diner where he meets a Marilyn Monroe lookalike who also happens to be named Marilyn. Surprisingly, he musters the courage to approach her and ask her out, and she ends up agreeing to meet him that night at the movies. Back at the police station, Officer Ann catches Moriarty doing coke and playing his harmonica in his isolated basement office. Remember when I said she was a fan? Well, let's just say he knows how to treat his fans. They end up in bed back at his place. Eric is such a poor bastard that he has to borrow some money from his aunt for his date. At the usual rate of interest, of course, and the promise to return home right after to give her a back rub. Marilyn ends up ghosting Eric because she gets wrapped up having dinner with a handsome coworker. And yes, that's a young Peter Horton just 4 years before he would face off against the Children of the Corn. Eric waits at the theater, but no Marilyn. Meanwhile, Marilyn finally realizes that she forgot she was supposed to meet up with Eric hours ago. We get a little montage of Eric slowly walking down the street looking at all the various theater marquees. Marilyn eventually makes it to the theater, but I guess these two star-crossed lovers just weren't meant to be. Eric encounters a lady of the night while waiting for a bus. He offers to pay her $10, but she just laughs at him and gets in a car with a John. Well, he isn't going to take that lying down.
Go to hell.
You tell her, Eric. Finally back at home, he's watching Richard Widmark in the 1947 film Kiss of Death on his reel-to-reel projector. And Stella is fed up with him constantly watching movies. She wheels into his room, blocking his view of the movie, and in her rage knocks over his projector just as it gets to his favorite scene where Widmark's character pushes a wheelchair-bound woman down some stairs. She apologizes but continues her ranting as she wheels into the next room that is littered with movie stuff. She demands that he come in there right now, and she tells him that he has to get rid of everything in there because she's tired of looking at it. He comes into the room, but he's now as crazed as she is. In his mind, he thinks he's Richard Widmark, and I'm sure you can see where this is going. Yep, he reenacts the scene from the movie and pushes Aunt Stella down a long flight of stairs. So yeah, she's dead. To continue his descent into madness, Eric even goes to Aunt Stella's funeral dressed up as Richard Widmark's Kiss of Death character. He then changes the name on his mailbox to Cody Jarrett. Eric somehow has also mastered the art of makeup as he paints himself up as Dracula. I will admit that I always thought this shot of his face half done was pretty cool. He goes out in full Dracula mode to a midnight screening of the Night of the Living Dead. After the movie, he makes his way to Marilyn's house where he somehow makes it inside. Conveniently, she's in the shower so she doesn't hear anything. In a scene right out of Psycho, he approaches the shower curtain before ripping it open with his hand raised. Naturally, she screams bloody murder and he freaks out. This whole scene is shot just like the shower scene in Psycho, but unlike Norman Bates, Eric doesn't have a knife. He has a quill ink pen that he instantly drops into the shower. She continues screaming and he gets mad and walks away saying that he only wanted her autograph. Dude is so weird. His night is not a total bust though, as he comes across the same prostitute that insulted him previously. Still in full Dracula mode, he confronts her in a parking lot and chases her down a dark alley. During the chase, she trips and falls into a white picket fence. And when Eric goes to check on her, she has a broken piece of fence sticking out of her neck. How's that for irony? At first, the blood bothers Eric, but then he falls back into his Dracula persona and proceeds to suck her blood. Back at work the next day, he confronts Richie about the trivia bet. He never paid up and Eric's trying to collect. It's not happening because Richie refuses to honor the bet, so they agree to disagree. That night, Eric tracks Richie down at the local carnival and heads him off in a dark alley dressed as Hopalong Cassidy. Eric gives Richie a cap gun and challenges him to a duel. Unfortunately for Richie, the gun that Eric has is a real one. Richie figures out it's Eric behind the mask. It's a bit too late to pay up on the bet, and Hopalong shoots him dead in the alley. Eric and another co-worker leave the police station after being interviewed about Richie's murder. Turns out that while they were there, they were both interviewed by Moriaty. The captain is pissed that Moriaty took it upon himself to give a set of test questions to each of Richie's co-workers. Moriaty voices his concern about Eric, but the captain tells him to butt out. While hitchhiking through Hollywood, Eric is picked up by a movie producer named Gary. During their drive, Eric pitches him his idea for a movie in the hopes of getting it made, and Gary seems interested. Rookie mistake. Eric is so excited about his upcoming fame that he goes on a montage of enjoying the sights along Hollywood Boulevard, such as Grauman's Chinese Theater and its Hollywood Walk of Fame. Eric shows up at work and gets into it with his boss Marty. During the argument, he loses his mind and his job. Later that night, Marty is working late and the night security guard leaves to get some coffee. Soon, Marty starts hearing noises in the warehouse and out of the darkness comes the mummy. Marty tries to get away but ends up having a fatal heart attack. Eric literally scared him to death. While in a TV store, Eric sees movie producer Gary being interviewed. Gary is asked about his next project, and it's the movie that Eric pitched him. However, during the interview, Gary doesn't give him any credit. So Eric calls the studio to talk to Gary, and Gary pretends not to even know him. Before he can even step out of the phone booth, Eric already slips into the Cody Jarrett character. Eric must have got a pretty good chunk of insurance money from Aunt Stella's accident because he's now driving through Hollywood in an old Packard while dressed up in a full-on gangster suit. He tracks movie producer Gary to a local barbershop. He parks outside where he pulls a Tommy gun out of a violin case. Gary's inside celebrating his birthday when Eric strolls in. No makeup this time. It's broad daylight and the room is full of people, otherwise known as witnesses. They scatter though when Eric lights up the ceiling. Gary still doesn't recognize him, so he lifts up his hat so Gary gets a good look at him just before he turns him into Swiss cheese. After the barbershop killing, the police are onto him. The police captain, Moriaty, and Officer Ann are at his place, and Moriaty figures out the connection between the killings with the various movie themes. Marilyn shows up to a photo studio that was looking for a Marilyn Monroe lookalike for a photo shoot. Her friend gives her a ride, and the name on the office is Cody Jarrett. The friend thinks it all looks legit though, so she leaves Marilyn there alone. Moriaty and Officer Ann are out looking for Eric's old Packard before he kills again. Officer Ann tells Moriaty that they found out Aunt Stella wasn't really Eric's aunt. She was actually his mother and had never told Eric the truth. Marilyn doesn't even recognize Eric, but that's probably because he slipped some drugs into her drink. The jig is up though when his car is spotted outside the studio and Moriaty and Ann show up. He really should have locked the door because they walk right in. Moriaty kicks a door in and is promptly shot in the leg for his effort. He tries to reach Eric, but he's mentally gone. He's full on lost his mind and thinks he's the movie character. Marilyn takes off and Eric catches up to her out on Hollywood Boulevard. Moriaty and Ann track them down to Grauman's Chinese Theater. It's a busy night as usual and there's a large crowd of tourists out front. So Eric runs inside with Marilyn while Ann calls in reinforcements. Moriaty catches up to him down in the front of the theater and tries to play the nice cop routine. But Eric is off his nut and crying to the big screen. Outside the theater, the cops show up and are ready to take him out. Moriaty tries to convince the captain that Eric is sick and needs help. Yeah, thanks for that, Dr. Phil. Eric and Marilyn are now on top of the theater looking down at the crowd. The police spot him and hit him with the spotlight. Then one of the cops hits him with a bullet. Wounding him only pushes Eric further into his Cody Jarrett persona though. In a moment of clarity, Eric sends Marilyn back downstairs to safety and then returns to the ledge looking down at everyone. Standing in the spotlight, once again he's ready for his big moment. But the police shoot him a few more times and then he basically recreates the ending of White Heat where Cagney says,
I finally made it, Mom! That's the world!
After the famous quote, he falls from the theater, or rather an obvious stuntman makes the fall. So yeah, he's dead. The end. Roll credits. I always felt like the trailer played this up as more of a horror movie, but I think it falls more into the psychological thriller genre. What did you think of this movie when you first saw it? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this trip down memory lane, please hit the like and subscribe buttons below to help grow this channel. I appreciate you taking time out of your day and hope you will come back for the next Back to the Feature.
Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.